This is Pete Fletcher. Join us for a conversation with writer Kelly Knox.
Where does Palpatine keep his Sith armies in his sleeveys? You got it, I got
It's so bad, but it's so good.
You're listening to Around the Galaxy.
Welcome to episode number 111 of Around the Galaxy, the Star Wars fan talk show. I am your host, Pete Fletcher. Thank you so much for joining us today. If this is your first visit with Around the Galaxy, well, thank you so much for checking us out. Make sure to keep up with us on Twitter or wherever you follow social media at ATGcast. If this is a return visit, then you already know that every single week I am privileged to spend time with authors and content creators and actors and super fans and podcasters and you name it. This week is no different. I am very fortunate to have had the opportunity to speak to Kelly Knox. Kelly Knox is a writer who has appeared on StarWars.com, IGN, Nerdist, DC Online, StarTrek.com, just to name a few. She also delivers a daily Star Wars pun on Twitter, so make sure to follow her there. You will laugh, you will groan, but no matter what, it's going to bring a smile to your face. Before we get started, I just wanted to mention that we now have a brand new Patreon offering. So if you head on over to patreon.com/ATGcast, you can join Around the Galaxy and be a part of the virtual live studio audience for every show that we record, including this one. Well, you can't do this one because you've missed it, but you can do next week and all the weeks moving forward. For as little as $3 a month, you can support the show. You'll get access to the live virtual audience, as well as perks, swag, and other goodies. So without further ado, I am very excited to bring you our interview with Kelly Knox. Kelly,
Hello.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
I am great. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
It's awesome. It's so much fun to finally be able to just have a good, fun conversation. We were talking a little bit before we got on how, Star Wars is just sort of meant to be fun. We have to remember that and just sort of have some fun with things. So I'm really glad and excited to talk to you because, as I said before, we'll get to it in a minute, but you have, like, every day you have a Star Wars pun, which is, they're all groaners, but they're all hilarious. So I think it's the dad in me that likes the dad humor.
Yeah,
but
they're horrible. I know.
They're horrible, but they're great. Horrible, right? But Kelly, so for people who don't know you, maybe give us a quick introduction.
Sure. So, I write for StarWars.com. I think I started in 2015, maybe 2016, but I've been doing that for a while. I write DIYs and crafts and features and interviews, and I still feel very lucky to be doing that. You mentioned, Nerdist, IGN. I just started writing for Funimation, which is anime distribution site. And where else would... before StarWars.com, I was the community manager on Star Wars Galaxies, the MMO.
Wow, so that's a number of years back. Wow.
Yes, that was 2007, I think, 2008. Wow. Yeah.
That's a game I kind of miss. I wish that was still. Is it? Are people still playing? I guess they are.
They are playing. So the official server shut down a little after I left, and then now there's a private server or two that people play on, and they have some pretty good communities out there. So
that's awesome. That's great.
Yeah.
So Kelly, when I say the phrase Star Wars, what's sort of the first thing that jumps into your head?
So it's sort of like a combination at this point of work, which is not a bad thing, right. But also just like, just a general sense of comfort, I guess, would maybe be the best word to sum up the nostalgia and the familiarity with that world. So it's kind of a work and play kind of a feeling for me now. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about when you got into Star Wars. What are some of your earlier memories and what brought you into becoming a Star Wars fan?
So I remember seeing Return of the Jedi. So that was 83. I was 5 or 6 years old. That's one of my first memories in a movie theater. And I remember it because the film broke. And I don't know if everybody listening or watching knows that, film strips used to not be digital, but they would physically break. And so it was right when, I think it's Paploo, when he steals the speeder bike on Endor, right when he stole it, the film strip snapped and everybody in the theater started just like screaming at the top of their lungs. So that made an impression on me at 5 or 6 years old. And then after that, I just watched the movies over and over on the VHS tapes taped off HBO, showing my age here. And then, so it was different for girls back then in the 80s. It wasn't popular at all for girls. Like, if you said you like Star Wars, you'd get made fun of. And so I think I hid that part of my fandom for a long time. I got very used to it being private, and still once in a while I catch myself, even as active as I am on Twitter in real life, talking about Star Wars, I get very nervous still. Oh, wow. It was like an old habit, I guess. But so yeah, it wasn't really until college that I started hanging the Darth Vader poster on the wall. And but yeah, I just watched the movies over and over again. I watched A New Hope probably more than any other, learned all the words, listen to the soundtracks, because back then you couldn't take a movie with you; you would take the soundtrack with you. So
it's interesting to hear you say that, because it's funny, because that is exactly, and I think that's one of the reasons why I ended up getting into music a little bit, and I play and that sort of thing. But I think that's exactly it, right? If it wasn't on HBO for a while anyway, and when it was, you had to hopefully tape it and get it right and all that. But you're right. That's one of the things for me. That's what told the story to me, was listening to. I had the double LP of the original soundtrack, and the amazing thing about John Williams is, like, you could literally see the film, you could see the movie listening to that music.
Yep. I remember being on a bus ride somewhere and just sitting there and listening to the Battle of Yavin music. And I was like, gosh, you can almost see it in your head play out. Yep.
Yeah. And that's what makes Williams so amazing. Cause I also feel like he did that also with E.T. and Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park is another one of those films where when I listen to the soundtrack, I know exactly where in the movie I'm hearing at that moment. So you grew up listening to the soundtracks and so I'm curious. I mean, tell me a little bit more about growing up as a little girl who loved Star Wars and having to hide. I mean, it almost feels unfathomable now, because there are so many female fans. But tell me a little bit about that. I mean, it's interesting here. You say you were almost embarrassed to admit to it.
Yeah. So before the prequels, I would say it was sort of a rough time for girls or women, I think, just because it was an unexpected fandom for most people, I think, to hear coming from a girl. So like I said, I didn't have a lot of merch up on the walls or anything like that. I would read the books and everything, and it was fine. The only time I remember being made fun of was high school. I think it had come up and I mentioned I liked it, and my friends started teasing me, and I was like, oh, okay, still, I'll keep that quiet. But yeah, at some point in college, it was right. I think it's because it was right when the prequel started ramping up, and it just started to become, which is funny to say now, but it started to become a little more mainstream. I think it became a little more accepted for everybody to be a Star Wars fan. It wasn't just a little boys thing or men's thing.
Yeah, no, it's interesting too, because that was around a time when there was just a tweet the other day that somebody posted and I shared. It was the magazine cover for Time magazine when it had Liam Neeson and Ewan McGregor, and just that whole Star Wars was coming back, and it really did feel like it was becoming almost. It was almost cool, right? I mean, it's interesting because, I mean, even maybe part of it was, girls weren't into it because it wasn't cool to be into it, and to distance yourself a bit from it. But you obviously, based on where your fandom grew, you also took an interest in other types of fandoms, or did that come later on in life when you got into Marvel and DC and some of that stuff? I
was around 12 when I got into Star Trek: The Next Generation, pretty full, full time. Then gosh, I think I probably started reading comics around then. I didn't really get into DC as much until I had the same job that I worked on Star Wars Galaxies. We were also at the studio making DC Universe Online, and they had a closet full of graphic novels that DC Comics had sent, or you could just take home whatever you wanted. So I caught up on so many DC Comics. So that was like in 2007, like I said, for Star Wars Galaxy. So yeah, I started as a Marvel reader as a kid. I remember reading West Coast Avengers and X-Men. And then, I moved into DC, and now I just read pretty much whatever I can.
What do you think it is about Star Wars that kind of lends itself to those multiple fandoms? Did you start in Star Wars and then go into the others, or did it all kind of hit you all around the same time?
I'd probably say all around the same time. I think it was so much of just like almost my everyday to put on a Star Wars movie. I didn't even realize I was, a Star Wars fan, and it was just, what I wanted to watch that day. Yeah. I think kind of all around the same time. It's
an interesting point too that you say that, because there was before the internet, and I hate to draw that line because I don't think that that's exactly where it was, but at that time, fandom didn't exist in the same way it did. And I feel like maybe Star Trek was really kind of the first sort of place where people started to sort of wear their fandom with pride a bit as well. But so, I can totally understand that you just come home and that would be what you would do. You would watch Star Wars. Yeah. Whereas it's interesting that comparison you made to boys and girls, where to me, my two best friends growing up, that was all it was. I had my one friend in the neighborhood, and we played with Star Wars action figures. That was all we did. And my other friend, I'd go to his house after school, and we would listen to the story of Star Wars on LP, and we would just it became our personality. Where, look, I have a podcast of Star Wars toys, but so thankful because I have an 11-year-old daughter now, and she has no problem wearing a Star Wars t-shirt to school. Yep. She has no issue talking about how much Rey is her favorite character, and she likes Kylo Ren and all these other things. And it's great. How would you, as somebody who's lived through it and being a big Star Wars fan, a big active Star Wars fan on social media, how do you perceive and what do you feel when you look at the way the sort of the Star Wars fandom has become sort of gender neutral? It doesn't matter, boys, girls, whoever can become fans.
It's definitely, like you said, it's everyone now is a Star Wars fan, which is fantastic. I think because we all see the same, things that appeal to everybody. The stories of hope, the good guys are always going to win. Those kinds of stories, I think, kind of speak to everyone. My daughter right now is studying the hero's journey in her English class, and we were talking about Star Wars and how it's basically our modern myth now. I think that we all have these stories now of Star Wars and Luke, and we know it, and it's sort of like our modern mythology. I think a little bit because it is such broad appeal to everybody.
Now, has your daughter grown up a Star Wars fan, or?
She liked this. I always have to say this is because her mom thinks it's cool. It's very hard for her to think it's cool. So it's sort of become like mom's thing. But she did enjoy Solo. That's been her favorite one when we saw Solo in the theater. Unfortunately, the first Star Wars she saw in the theater was Force Awakens, and it ended. She was just like, she was so shocked about Han Solo that it kind of colored the rest of her Star Wars experience for a while until we went to go see Solo: A Star Wars Story. And she was like, okay, that was fun. That one I really liked. And I was like, yeah, that's a good one for kids, I think. A little underrated for kids.
No, I think you're right. The cool thing about Solo, too, is it's got that sort of weird Star Wars all over it. All the different creatures and kind of the different things that make it Star Wars. One of the questions that I like to explore is, now that the Skywalker saga is allegedly over, right? I mean, who knows where it's going to go or whatever, but what is it to you that, especially because you are a fan of multiple genres, you are a Star Trek fan, you are a DC and Marvel fan, what makes something uniquely Star Wars? What separates it from being just cool science fiction or cool fantasy? What's necessary for, and even, just as the saga continues moving forward, as the franchise continues moving forward, what needs to be there for it to be a Star Wars film?
That's a really great question. For one thing, I've always noticed about Star Wars is that in the real world, I think Star Wars is best experienced when the storytellers, whether it's George Lucas or the Mandalorian crew, when they're trying to push the envelope of what's possible. I think that really comes through in the stories that they're telling. And I think that brings a lot of energy that maybe most movies, like, I'm not going to say anything that's not Star Wars, because of course there's other movies where they're pushing those technological boundaries. But for some reason, I feel like that spirit of doing everything they can to tell the story they want to tell, I think really comes through on Star Wars.
Well, that's an interesting concept, because it is. It's interesting to see that it's coming from the desire to tell the story in a unique way, right? Obviously, as you were pointing out, George, when he made the original trilogy, was breaking boundaries there. When he made the prequel trilogy, that was he had so many toys to play with. He almost, some people say he almost played too much with them, but either way, he was telling his story and he was true to himself. And I think, it's interesting because you're the first one to mention that as part of what makes it Star Wars, is that it's from the people producing the story more so perhaps than the story itself.
I think their passion really comes through in that way, and maybe it trickles down to the actors and the story and their performances. And that's just one of my favorite aspects. It always has been of Star Wars. So that's even when the prequels get hate, you have to remember how much he invented to make those stories happen at all. Digital storytelling, basically. Yeah. So that's one of my favorite things about Star Wars. So.
I think that's an interesting concept too, that I think people forget, is that, people give Ahmed Best, for example, a hard time for Jar Jar Binks, but without Ahmed Best, without Jar Jar Binks, you don't get Gollum. You don't get 80% of the Avengers films, right? You don't get that technological push. It was so important. And I love that connection between the story and the desire to tell it. I think that's a really interesting, because as you were just talking about before with the hero's journey, all those pieces are baked in. And let me ask you this, especially because you're looking at it right now with your daughter, is it overtly done, do you think? Or do you think it's just a sort of the natural way people tell stories? It's so baked into us as people.
I think George Lucas knew what he was doing with The New Hope specifically, because it does follow it so perfectly. But I think maybe after that, not quite as intentionally, but it still definitely follows that pattern, or you can at least see where it might fall into that. Yeah,
it is. It's literally probably the most perfect example that you can go with in modern times, which is pretty wild.
And now an ad selected for you by the Trade Federation. Roger.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your social media presence, because it's so good. It's so funny.
Thanks. I don't know if either of those things is true.
So, let me put it this way. I definitely do. I do laugh. So
good.
If you're not following Kelly on Twitter, make sure you do. Her handle will be in the show notes. But you don't miss a day with a Star Wars pun, do you? Pretty much.
I'm trying to now, because I think I've said twice now, like, I don't have to do this every day. And then I still do it every day. So yes, I'm trying to at least take the weekends off.
Give yourself a break. Yeah. So we were talking a little bit before we went on, but where does that come from? What sort of started you doing that?
It was, I think it was just after the lockdown started, and I had noticed that everything on Twitter, because that's where I do it all, everything on Twitter was just, bad news after horrible news. And so I realized what I always like to see is just every once in a while, just something to make you just smile or even groan. And so I thought of one of my favorite, just regular old, just like a classic joke. And so I just kind of changed it up to Star Wars it. It was where does Palpatine keep his Sith armies? And the answer is in his sleeveys. because it's his army, so they're going to see. So that was the. You got it. I got you.
It's so bad, but it's so good.
And so I remember that one. That was the first one, and then it didn't even do it's not like it did fantastic reactions or anything, but I was just like, I'm going to try and keep this going because everything is so terrible right now. I might as well add some good terrible to somebody's Twitter timeline. So for most jokes, I know you're going to ask probably how I do it every day.
How do you keep
a lot of them?
Yeah.
Like that one, a lot of them are, just classic puns that I try to turn around into, into Star Wars a little bit. Sometimes it's just a name that's funny. Sometimes it's, I'll see something on like Reddit pop up with a certain pun, and then I can use that as inspiration to go back and kind of Star Wars it up again.
Right.
They obviously don't always work. And they're never going to be mean. Like I never do it to make fun of anything. No, I'm never going to make fun of Star Wars or make fun of actors or any of that stuff. So it's all in a good spirit to just try to give people one little smile. It's not as bad lately, I feel like, online anymore, but those first few months of the quarantine, I think I just really wanted to give somebody just a 5-second groan.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, when you're sort of somebody calls it doom scrolling, just going through, just to be able to get that little stop. And I do have to tell you, and hopefully this will make you smile, I do often grab my kids and give them the pun, do the little joke for them. And you know what? I have to say, I laugh more than they do because I'm the dad. So I get dad. And so, but now I can tell them, I can see it's not me. It's this lady that I'm talking to right now.
All her fault.
That's great. So you also, you also do crafts on StarWars.com. So you're bringing some joy there from a Star Wars perspective. Where does that come from? Is that something you've done your whole life, or?
It's not actually. That started when my daughter was 1 or 2 years old. She would wake up very early in the morning, like 5 or 6 in the morning. And so, come 8 a.m., I'd be like, now what are we going to do? And so we started by doing all the crafts I could pretty much find on Pinterest. I started to get inspired enough from my own just interest to start turning some of those crafts into Star Wars crafts. And then, so it was kind of the same thing as the dad jokes, right? You take something that's existing and kind of Star Wars it a little bit. And so, so I started doing that with her. And then I started sharing them online because there wasn't a lot out there, that was specifically Star Wars. So I started sharing them on my own blog and on Twitter, and eventually they caught the notice of the editor at StarWars.com, and he got in touch and asked if I'd like to do it for the website. So
that's great. Yeah, I mean, again, this is Star Wars is, we talked about it before, it's fun, it should be lighthearted, and it's also generational, and these sort of things that you can share with your children, and your kids don't even have to be Star Wars fans to enjoy, doing some of these sort of activities together. And like, there are times where, like, I know my son he loves Clone Wars. We watched Phantom Menace the other day. He's 8 years old, but I know there's times where he's like, all right, we're going to do Star Wars stuff because dad likes Star Wars stuff. And I want to do it. And so if you can make that connection, that's really terrific. That's really, that adds a really nice layer to it.
So my daughter might not be into the movies, but she definitely likes characters. And I think maybe that might be how that started was, she'd make a Chewbacca or use a little handprint and make a Yoda. So I think maybe she became fans of the characters and not so much, a specific movie or a series. Not yet. One day.
Not yet. We'll force it. No, it's
it's tough. It's tough when it's your mom's thing. I think it's really tough.
It's true. I mean, the kids definitely they know, right? They can find those little ways to kind of dig it. Like my son sometimes is like, "Oh, you're gonna go do your podcast now?"
Exactly
like,
right.
Yes.
She has the same tone. Oh, is this a Star Wars thing? Yes. Yep.
Yes, it is. Yes. But it's funny because it used to, kind of even what you were saying before, like when the movies first came out, they were kids movies. I mean, I remember my dad and his friends who were science fiction fans, really getting into Star Wars and enjoying it. But like, it was like all in on the kids. Now, I was going to say we're adults, but I don't know that I'm an adult, but we're older human beings.
Supposedly.
And it still brings that childlike wonder, right? I mean, that's that ability to just, I mean, I do this every Tuesday night. I get to talk to somebody new about Star Wars, and I get excited to talk about Star Wars with new people all the time. And if you can share that with your family, whether it's just, they do a craft because, it's a time to spend with my parents, or they really become big fans. Either way, Star Wars has done an amazing thing. And I think, George saying that it's for kids, we forget that sometimes.
Mm-hmm. The joyfulness of it, I think sometimes it's hard to forget when you get a little caught up in the details.
Yeah. And I mean, if you were to look at some of the conversations on social media or wherever, you would never think that this was a kid's thing. And then, so this is, I'll share a silly little story. So last night I was talking to my son, and somebody had texted me. It was that old, it was from, I think, 2013. It was a Star Wars weekend, and it's horrible. I mean, it's awful, but it's the dancing Chewbacca, and I mean, it's like, it's cringeworthy. But I showed my son, and he laughed for 25 minutes straight. He loved every single bit of it. And now I look at it, like when I first saw it, I was like, oh, come on, that's a little too much. But now I watch it, I'm like, I get it. This is what Star Wars is all about.
Yeah, it's fun. It's just supposed to be fun.
Yep. And speaking of fun and for kids, you've written some D&D adventures, but they're more family oriented. Is that correct? Did I read that right?
Yep, that's right. I've written 2 D&D adventures. One is based on Bob Ross, because I'm a fan of Bob Ross, and the other one's just an original adventure, also for kids. I wrote the first one, the Bob Ross one, for my daughter, because she was DMing. She had joined the D&D club at school, and she was DMing and wanted to run something for her friends. So we couldn't find anything that was out there that she liked, and so we had watched some Bob Ross together. So it kind of inspired me to put that together for her.
And coming up, you have a book for Marvel called Marvel Monsters. Is that correct?
Yes, that's coming out in July from DK Books.
And tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. It's sort of a guidebook or an encyclopedia, I guess, of the monsters from Marvel, which is like the big, now that we all say kaiju for Godzilla, but that type, the big, the big city smashing monsters that in the 60s that Stan Lee and Jack Kirby just put out, month after month. In Tales to Astonish and Strange Tales, there was all sorts of guys that you probably never heard of. And so those guys are in there, up to the more current monsters like Morbius, the living vampire, classic monsters like the Werewolf by Night. He was from the 1970s, I think. So there's a very interesting timeline from all the way in the 60s and 70s up till pretty recently. I think the most recent one I got in there was the new Werewolf by Night. They just relaunched his book in a little mini series that's actually really good. So it's the story of each of those kinds of monsters, and their stats and what sets them apart. It was a lot of fun.
It sounds like it was a lot of fun. And the good news is, too, it's available for pre-order now on Amazon, right? So I'll put the link. I'll definitely put the link for that down in the notes. Yeah, if you're a Marvel fan, I think that's what's to tie it to Star Wars. You forget, or I forget, I can't say you forget because I don't know, but I often forget that Star Wars is all that stuff. It's space wizards, it's spaceships, it's laser guns, and it's rancors and sarlacc pits and mudhorns, and like it's everything. And maybe that's what Star Wars, that's what pulls people in, is because you can come from a Game of Thrones, Tolkien sort of perspective and find your niche, or you can be a monster fan and find your niche, or you can just love spaceships and find your thing there. So, do you remember what it was that attracted you to it when you were a young kid? To
Star Wars specifically?
Yeah.
I'm not sure that I do because it's just always been there.
Yeah.
I know when I think of it, I think of the Battle of Yavin in particular. So I would probably just say the excitement of the space battles probably stands out the most. The Jedi stand out a lot for me, which is why I think I've enjoyed the High Republic so much.
Yeah. Yep.
So I think those aspects of it are what got my imagination going as a kid.
We'll be back in a moment with the 10-question segment. But first, this word from the Trade Federation.
We have a section on the show we call the 10 questions section. And this is, there's no wrong answers. I won't judge you, but people listening might. So I can't. So let's, if you're down with that, I'll bring them up. But the first question is, what is your favorite Star Wars movie, TV show, or book?
That's an easy one. That's A New Hope.
Yeah.
First one. That's the one I've got memorized. I still watch it at least once a month.
Yeah. How often would you say you put a Star Wars movie on, other than New Hope, if you're watching that once a month?
Again, it sounds snotty, but if it's for work, it's pretty often. But for fun, every couple weeks or so. If I don't know what to put on in the background, it's usually Star Wars.
Cool. All right. So the next question is, what is your favorite Star Wars sound effect?
Oh, that's a good one. The TIE Fighter, I think.
Yeah.
It's one of those sounds that I instantly recognize and makes me happy, weirdly enough.
It's such a unique sound, and a couple people have called that out, and I always marvel at just the brilliance of Ben Burt to create a sound effect from things that have nothing to do with a spaceship and combine, the elephant scream and the wet pavement and all those things, and it's such a unique sound. And somebody a couple of weeks ago was saying that just the sound of it can instill fear. But my counter to that is, if you didn't see Star Wars, you have no idea what that sound is. That's true. It sounded just yells. Somebody's yelling at you is kind of what it sounds like. Yelling through like a paper towel tube. Yeah. It's great. All right. So there's a lot to choose from here, but who's your favorite droid? Gosh, that's a hard one. Probably C-3PO. I just wrote about him recently for StarWars.com. Maybe because he's a kindred spirit. Poor little anxious guy. Feel that. But BD1 is certainly coming up the ranks lately. So the little buddy droid from Fallen Order. Or Fallen Order. He's just so cute. I love the personality they put in him. Are you a video gamer? Do you play a lot? Yes, I do. Yeah. But I was really into Battlefront and Battlefront 2. I played those way too much. And then, a little bit of Squadrons, not as much as I would have liked. They're all great games, and I'm just the potential for Star Wars games is always there and always super exciting. So, what's your favorite non-Star Wars movie? I know I put on the 2012 Avengers movie a lot for background noise. That one's always good. I guess that would be it. Yeah. Wait, it's Clue. I just thought of that. I was like, wait, there's something I watch when I'm in a bad mood. What is it? It is Clue the movie with Tim Curry and everybody. I really like that. It's funny, they say that you can tell a lot about a person by which Tim Curry movie they identify the most with. I love that movie. Can't believe I forgot that. You put me on the spot, so I didn't think of it right away, but yes. Look at it this way. Next time somebody asks you, you'll be prepared. You'll Clue the movie. All right. So the next question is, what's your favorite Star Wars collectible that you own? Probably this guy behind me, who you probably can't see. There he is. The Darth Vader helmet. It's the Don Post helmet from 1983. Oh, okay. This guy came from my house in Texas. He lived in the attic there for a very long time, so he's a little warped from the Texas heat. But the helmet is, I think, my favorite because he's made it through a lot to come all the way up here to the Seattle area. But I also have a ton of other stuff in the closet and whatnot. But Vader's always out there. That's the one that you always have out. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's, it's funny. I remember even when I saw Vader for the first time as a kid, it's just like, that's the helmet you want. Like if you're going to have, that's what started my Goofy collection behind me was I got the Black Series Vader helmet, and which it just, it's so iconic. It's so perfect. All right. So if you could own a spaceship or vehicle from the Star Wars universe, what would you own?
A U-Wing. I really love the U-Wings from Rogue One.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say the Falcon or anything because I don't think I would want to do the upkeep.
Right.
But the U-Wing is so cool.
Yeah, I there's sometimes I just tell people they can't choose the Falcon anyway because a lot of people pick it. But
too much maintenance.
Absolutely. But yeah, the U-Wing was such a pleasant surprise from Rogue One, I think. Yeah,
and it seems so. The word that comes to mind is utilitarian. It just seems so much more useful than all the others, but still, it's more of it's in squadrons in particular. It's like a support ship, and that's kind of my personality a little bit.
Kelly Knox support ship. Got it.
Yes, exactly right.
All right. So if you could be any character in Star Wars, who would it be and why?
Be any character. All those poor people, though. If you think about it, it's so sad for everybody.
Before you answer, while you think, I will say it's funny because when I started this show 2 years ago, and I would ask that question, it was always somebody would pick one of the top four, right? They would just pick, one of the without thinking. And now, and I don't know, maybe it's the pandemic or maybe it's just the way people have started to think differently or more looking inward. Like people used to say, I want to be Princess Leia, but she had a really rough life, and so it's an interesting switch. So I could tell that was kind of your gears were going when I asked you the question.
Yes, because I mean, they all lose everything. Yeah. All these poor guys. So if I could be in maybe Chewbacca, he's the coolest. He's the most underrated. He's there for everybody. Support ship Chewbacca.
That's right.
So yes, I'll go Chewbacca.
All right, Chewbacca, good. Chewbacca. And if anybody makes you angry, you're not gonna have to worry about it. Along similar lines, if we were gonna make a Mount Rushmore of Star Wars characters, if we had to pick the four that represent Star Wars where it is today, who do you put on that Mount Rushmore?
So specifically who represents Star Wars?
Or for you, when you think of Star Wars, those four faces that need to be there. And the thing is, it has evolved so much. I mean, 20 years ago, it was a simple question. Mm-hmm. And I think now there's so many choices to put in there. It's interesting to see which four it is for you. Yeah,
that's a fascinating question, because if you would say, like, if it was the Rebellion's Mount Rushmore, who would be on there? Right. And that'd be different. Because I'd be like, put Bodhi Rook up there. That guy doesn't get enough credit. But for Star Wars in general, I think you have to go with Darth Vader, because he is the face of Star Wars.
Yeah.
Or the mask of Star Wars. Gosh, my instinct is to say Vader in the original trio, because I'm an original trilogy diehard, I guess. I would still say Han, Luke, Leia, and Vader.
Yeah, without those four, the story doesn't go anywhere, right? So it's a good answer. It's a good answer.
Thanks. If for representing Star Wars, yes, that's where you could go with different Mount Rushmore configurations. I'm sure for different.
I could do a whole show on. Okay, now who's your animated Mount Rushmore? Yeah. Because I mean, you could make a case for Ahsoka in that top four of all Star Wars without going too far outside the line, but yeah, you're right. And I think if you're thinking classic and you're thinking representing Star Wars, that's the way to go. Yeah. What's your favorite Star Wars moment?
That is always I always call it by the track name, the Binary Sunset on Tatooine, from A New Hope. That music always gets me. And so I always think of it as the Binary Sunset scene. So yeah, the right before everything changes for Luke and he has no idea. That's always my favorite scene.
Yeah. That's great. Well, you're in good company because that's what Hal Hickel said as well. So,
it's so good.
and finally, what is your go-to or favorite Star Wars quote?
Go-to or favorite quote. So that also changes regularly. Yeah. For a long time, I really liked "Who's the more foolish, the fool or the fool who follows him?" Mm-hmm. That was like my relationship advice to myself for a long time. When I found myself chasing somebody, I was like, "Who's the more foolish, Kelly?" So yeah, I really love that quote, and I've been really lucky to write up a lot of quotes for StarWars.com, so I've heard a lot of them. But I think that one might still be number one.
It hasn't been displaced yet. That's great. Well, that's a really great quote, and it's not a lot of people use that one, and I think they should. I mean, that's super memorable as well.
Yeah.
And
Obi-Wan wisdom.
Yeah, Obi wisdom to Han when he needed it and wasn't willing to listen to it, and yeah, that's great. Well, Kelly, this has been a ton of fun. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today. Where can people find you online?
They can find me on StarWars.com. They can find me on Twitter at Kelly_Knox. I'm mostly there. I'm not really on much other social media, so you can always find me there.
Excellent. Well, good. And they can find you on StarWars.com fairly regularly and a bunch of other places. And your new book, Marvel book, which I will definitely be ordering, comes out in July. I can't wait for that. It's going to be great. But thank you so much. I hope we get a chance to talk again soon.
Yes, thanks for letting me ramble.
Well, that wraps it up for this episode of Around the Galaxy. Thanks to our guests, and thank you for listening. If you had fun, please like, subscribe, share, rate, and review it. If you really liked it and would like to become a part of our virtual live studio audience when we record, please head on over to our Patreon page at patreon.com/ATGcast. Make sure to follow us on Twitter and all your social media at ATGcast. Our music is brought to us by the band Silver Collared Knob, who can be found wherever you find music. Around the Galaxy is copyright 2021 Pete in the Seat Studios.